Oh, Illy, thank you for coming on my podcast.
Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited that you said yes to being one of my first guests. And I think I'm excited to have this conversation because it's just so easy to talk to you. And I feel like there's so much wisdom that you have at such a young age and that I know really came from God. And so I'm excited for us to just like chat and see where the goes. And I love hearing your story. Every time you tell it, it's just so cool to hear where you've been and where you've come from and where you're at today. And so tell me more about that. Tell me about your story.
I was born in Puerto Rico, raised in Mass. I'm one of four. I have a little sister who's 9. I have a brother who's 14 and a stepsister who is, I believe, 18. But for a long time, it was just me and my mom. So I was kind of raised up until 10, like an only child by my single mom. So she taught me a lot and she taught me how to be super independent, headstrong, like in a way, like you don't need no man, you could do it yourself. So I learned a lot from her, and that's kind of just how she raised me, so that's what I carried. And then I want to say like my identity was just always kind of prideful. Like I did really good in school, kind of for in a sense because of the pride. I liked being the A+ student. I liked coming home with good grades and showing my mom and being like, hey, look what I got, and her giving me a pat on the back. And that kind of kept me out of trouble, a lot of trouble. High school, I had a close group of friends and I stayed with them and we stayed out of trouble. But then I came here to Florida for college. And then when I moved here, it was my dream. My mom ended up following me, and then the rest of the family kind of moved here, so it was great. But coming here, I didn't know anybody. And then I also kind of didn't form an identity in high school. Like I wasn't part of any of the popular cliques or part of the Spanish cliques or the nerdy cliques or the bookworms. I kind of just floated. And I did a lot of sports. So when I came here, I was like, okay, I can literally be anyone that I want. So I had this kind of self-righteous attitude and I was like, okay, I'm going to be this, I'm going to be that. And I dabbled in a whole lot and it spiraled. And then I just got so kind of deep into just the hype and secular things and all the things. And it was so far, like I was so far gone in it. So because I was raised kind of as like a single mom, I didn't have a close relationship with a father or really like a male figure. And in a way it was like a blessing because at the same time I feel like I didn't have like a tainted picture of what a father should be or not be or what a husband should act like or not act like. But then that also left a big hole for like male relationships and a gap of like I don't know how to navigate it healthily. So when I was in college and I decided to create this image of me, I was just dating and messing around with guys who were not good for me, and it kind of made me feel like important in a sense. So I was like, okay, like I can do this, I can do that. So I went down that rabbit hole and male relationships were kind of just like a thing it filled kind of like my ego. And after that, I mean, I feel like sin doesn't enter alone. You start with one and then it brings company. So it didn't just end there, it didn't just start there. I went through a lot. I drank, I also smoked some weed, and it was just like a whole combination of things, and I was so deep into it. And in my lowest point, I just cried out to God. I remember I was in a field. My cousin lives in a trailer park and I was talking to her and it felt like the enemy was just kind of tormenting me and making me feel crazy. So it was mental torment, and I couldn't believe that nobody was seeing what I was seeing, but it was really all in my head and he was using that as bait. So I was venting to her about some issues and I was like, oh, but this is happening. And I was kind of pinpointing it to actual physical things that were happening. But like the Bible says, we don't battle with flesh and blood, we battle with principalities. So I was trying to tell her the battle that was going on internally, but it wasn't making sense. So I did sound kind of kooky. And she just looked at me like, I don't know what you're talking about. And in my despair, I just kind of lost it. And I ran outside. And I wasn't raised in the church, but my mom always told me that if I had a bad dream or if something was affecting me, that I could always call on Jesus. If I was scared, call on Jesus, pray to him, and you'll be okay. So there was like a seed planted of his name, but I never had a relationship. So I was raised pretty secular, even though my mom is the daughter of a pastor. She was raised in the church, but there was a lot of church hurt growing up. He was one man on the pulpit and another man at home. So she separated and she never went back, and I wasn't raised in it. So now fast forwarding kind of to when I was just so deep into it and I was talking to my cousin, I went outside in the field and I just cried to the Lord. I remember just feeling so broken, and the only thing that I could say was Jesus. And it's kind of like my spirit took over and kicked me out of the driver's seat and called on his name. And and I fell to my knees in that moment because I was so deep in self-righteousness, and I kind of like made myself my own God. So I kind of wrestled with him on that field, and I was like, Lord, if this is you, then don't let me get up, because I kind of felt like, like I could do it, like I don't need anybody. And the field has poop. I just want to note this. It had poop. It had ticks. It had all the bugs. I'm allergic to grass. I'm not going to lay on this grass. Like, it was not my will to lay on this grass at all. And because I just fell and his presence was so thick and holy, I was laying down, and his weight that felt like a hug, but also like powerful, like his authority was on me, and I could not get up. And I wrestled with him, and I was like, if this is you, then don't let me get up until until you're ready, until you think I'm ready to get up. And I remember trying to move my hands, and it was like pinned down by the weight of just his glory. And I stayed there, and I just cried and cried, and it felt like his presence kind of washed over me, and all of my sins were forgiven. Like, I could feel from the tip of my head to the ends of my toes, like it was just a washing of
Wow.
everything. It was so beautiful and powerful that there was no other way that I cannot say that it wasn't him. Like, I called for him and he showed out. So after that, I was like, okay. I remember that day I like changed. It was like a light switch. Like, I stopped vaping. I didn't smoke anymore. I quit everything. I was like, okay, Lord, I'm yours. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm gonna follow you.
Amazing. So I love what you're talking about when you went from Massachusetts to Florida. You
Mm-hmm.
said you kind of had this, like, you kind of changed your identity. Like, you had an identity in Massachusetts and you changed it in Orlando. So tell me about a little bit about that, about
Mm-hmm.
how you have grown in your identity the last several years.
I didn't really have one. So because of that, I kind of went with the crowd, and
Yeah.
I never fully fit in one. So I was like, okay, I'm just gonna be the floater. But I feel like we're all really wired to plant. And because I was never really planted and I didn't know who my identity was, and like I did all the sports you can think of because I felt like there was people who picked a sport and they were experts at a sport and they would get scholarships at this sport. And I would see them and be like, I'm good at all these sports, but I don't have that. Like, you have something. And I didn't have that in
Yeah.
friendships. I didn't have that in sports. I didn't really have that like at all. So when I moved to Florida, I was like, I can be anything that I want to be. No one knows me here. No one knows my past. No one, I could pick up new interests, talk a certain way. I could completely change the floater me and be planted wherever I want to be. So I ended up being planted with just the group of people that were like in my hallway, and then they were very party, so I took root. I really wanted to be planted, so I feel like the first kind of group that accepted me, I molded into that, and then that's where I stayed.
Yeah. And then you kind of shared how you put your value or your identity in, like, men and their approval of you. Like,
Yeah.
how do you feel like all of that shifted when you became a Christian?
I love that question. I never really thought about it that way. But I think it has to do with I never valued them in a way, and I never valued myself. So it was more of like, what can you bring to the table? Or, how are you kind of serving me in a sense? So it was never like I got really attached. And then I think because of that, it was like a give and take. So there was always still like a divide. I never really got that close, or there was like a need and a want, but I was living in such like self-righteousness that I think that blocked a lot of it. And I also think that in a way that protected me, because now my first actual relationship with my husband is like so pure, and maybe if I got really attached with, somebody from college that I didn't value or really didn't value me, I would have latched on. And if I latched on, like, that would have been endgame. Because
Yeah.
I never really had a relationship with a male figure. So in a way, it was like the self-righteousness was so big that it didn't allow anything else to kind of take root. And now looking back, it was nice. Well, not nice, but you know what I mean? Like, nice that I never got to a point where I just kind of latched on and took that male's words as my identity, because it could have gotten there, especially not having male confirmation or validation.
Yeah, that makes sense. So you mentioned your husband. How did you guys meet?
So I say he was directly gifted from the Lord, because I really couldn't have picked a better man, and I wasn't even looking. Like, he literally just bop. It was,
Happens.
honestly, it really
Yeah,
is.
looking, that's when it happens.
And then
Or
it's
when you don't.
great.
Yeah,
Yeah,
for
because
sure.
then you're not planning anything, and I feel like you got no expectations, and then you can't mess it up with your expectations, so it just happens. So after I met Jesus and he saved my life, I got plugged into a church because there's a little backstory. So I got plugged into a church. It was my stepdad's barber who invited us there. And it's a really small church. It was Spanish. And I went there and I got planted there. Went every Sunday, was involved with the youth. And there was a member there and he was interested in me. And I was just interested in a godly relationship. So although I didn't think he was really my type, I was like, I want to date differently and with someone who's a believer because I've never had that before. And we didn't really date. We talked. I know the term talking,
Yeah.
but the whole church knew. So it was like we were dating. And I just remember the whole time it didn't feel right because it didn't look different. It was the pace was secular. I felt like there was a lack of boundaries and I was still a baby Christian. So I knew that it wasn't supposed to look this way, but I didn't know what it was actually supposed to look like. I just felt kind of an uneasiness. It wasn't really comfortable. So I was wrestling with, is it me? Is it him? Like, he's a God-fearing man. He was like a leader in kind of that church. So I was like, I can't get any better, right? Like, what's the issue here? And then I went on a cruise with my family and I remember just confiding in my aunt and I was just telling her and she just gave me the advice of like, it doesn't seem like you're really interested and you don't have peace. So I think you know the answer. So when I got off of that cruise, didn't talk to him for a week because there's no signal, I just called it off and I told God, I'm like, okay, I'm still new to getting to know you, so I just want to fully immerse myself in you. I'm not going to be worrying about dating or this or that because it's too much drama. I mean, mind you, I just got, I'm in this church, it's a small church, and I'm still learning, and then I'm over here dating one of the leaders, so now it became the scandal, and I was like, oh my gosh, like, so I was like, I'm done, I'm over it, I'm not dating, not doing nothing besides just looking at you, Jesus. And I remember I wrote a list of qualities because I was so just laser focused and I want a man who believes in God and who is planted in the church because it was just where I was at. I was on fire for him at the time. And, I associated being on fire for Christ with just church, nothing else, right? So I made a list and I made a list of qualities that I wanted in a man. And I was like, okay, now I'm going to be specific. I want a man who is patient. I want a man who is kind. I want a man who is financially intelligent, like knows how to handle money. And I just went down. And then I even put, which is silly, I put in the bottom and I literally put, I know this is shallow, but I want someone who's taller than me and colored eyes. And then I put that. I covered it. This is my letter to God. And I was like, Lord, you give them to me when you want to. And then I just remember sticking it under my bed because I had a little box of stuff, like little quotes of Bible verses. And I was done with it. And a week after, he sends me a message on Facebook. On Facebook. Yeah, I know. And he just says, hey. So he sends me a message on Facebook saying, hey, and I posted pictures of the cruise and my cousins posted pictures of the cruise tagging me and they go to the same church in Sanford. So he messaged me, hey, and I remember looking at it and being done with guys because I told the Lord that I was over it. And I was just like, I looked at the message and I was like, I don't really care to reply, but I'm going to reply. And I replied, hey, back, the exact same thing he messaged me. But his second message was very sweet and different. He was like, hey, you just popped up on my friends you may know. And I just thought you were so beautiful. And I see that you have family members that go to my church. And I'm thinking, what a small world. So I'd like to chat. And I was like, okay, we can chat.
I love that. It's such a good story. And it's so cool, like, when God brings that thing when you're done, you're done trying to figure out, like, your own solution. And then like, I'm going to do it for you. You don't have to worry about it. And it's when we're stop trying to go our own way and trying to, like, figure out the solution to our problem. That's when God, like, really shows up and he just, like, outdoes it too. Like, he answers our exact prayer and desire. And it's just so.
No, and I couldn't have done it any better, So it really has to be God's way. And it really is when you release it. Because I think I didn't know, but now I know that there was a moment where I really could have idolized a relationship or idolized maybe a marriage or like, I want this so bad. And, because I kind of tried it and maybe if that past relationship went well, I probably could have gotten there also. But because it was just so copied and paste from my worldly self, I got out of it. But I do feel like maybe I was holding a little bit. And then when I released, like, okay, I'm really done and I just want to focus on you and I fix my eyes on you, that's when he's like, okay, I fully have you. You submitted yourself to me. So then a partner can come. Because, I mean, he's a jealous God. He wants to be first in priority in our lives. And maybe if I continued dating without actually giving my dating life to him, he would be second,
Yeah, for real. So How old were you guys when you guys got together and got married?
It was November 20, I believe, is
Okay.
when yeah. So I was 20.
You got married a year later?
So I was 20. Oh my goodness, I can't with the math. It was 29. I know
Okay.
that, but it was the end of 29. So I believe either I was 20 or just turned 21. Yeah, because we got married in 2021, like right kind of like a little bit after the thickness of COVID.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you've been married for a few years now. And
Yeah.
what do you think that you would want to tell someone who's within that first year of marriage, or maybe they're in the dating season or they're engaged? Like, what would you want to tell them? And if they're young, like they're,
Yeah.
those next steps, what would you want to tell like someone who's going through that?
For dating, ask the real questions, I think, and establish boundaries. So when we first started dating, before engagement, before everything, I mean, the whole thing was a surprise. And he'll say the same thing, that he wasn't really looking for marriage and I wasn't really looking for marriage, but he had preparation for marriage. Like, he's like, I know it's going to come in the future. So he was preparing kind of financially and career wise. I really wasn't. I was still in school and working a part-time job. But when we started dating and we had really good conversations, we eliminated the fluff, and it was just like, okay, tell me who you are. What do you value? What do you like? What are your goals? To see, and I don't know, things just clicked, and it was like, okay, our goals are similar, we both have goals, we've thought about this. So it was real conversation, and quickly we could see that it was going to go somewhere. So then we established boundaries quickly, because if we wanted this to be fruitful and honorable, then we had to do it differently. So I started just educating myself. Okay, the last relationship, it was the same as my previous relationships before being a servant of the Lord. So what do I have to do differently? And we sat down, we had an honest, real conversation. I want to say maybe a month into us getting to know each other, or a few weeks. And we were like, okay, what, you know you, and I know me. I know what my propensities are. You know your propensities. Some people could go a little bit further. Maybe hardcore making out isn't temptation for them. But knowing each other, we had to establish real, just practical boundaries. Like, we weren't going to be in a room, like a dark room alone together. We were going to have kind of a curfew, where we weren't going to be alone, so that there was just no added temptations. Making out, where's the placement of the hands? What's comfortable for you, what's comfortable for me, like where would the temptation be? And after those boundaries, we stuck with it. And it's nice because you have an accountability partner. So when I maybe am leaning towards like, okay, it's not that bad on one given day, then you have the accountability partners like, no, we established these boundaries and today I'm feeling strong, so no. And then you just feed off of each other. So I would say in the dating, you have the real conversations, and if it's something that you do want to go forward with, establish boundaries, just so that you're protected. I feel like if you want it to be something that God is going to bless, then act like it. Maybe he won't be your husband, but maybe he will. And you want to kind of prepare every relationship like he is your husband, so that if it does lead that way, and, Lord leads you into marriage, then you have honored him and you've a relationship beforehand.
Did you lead those conversations with the boundaries, or did that come from him?
I did.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah.
And what made you kind of do that? Like, did you know, like, you didn't want to do it the same way? Or, like, did you know that it was supposed to look,
Yeah,
How
I
did
didn't
you
know
know
it was
that?
supposed to look different. And the questions came up when we chatted, and it kind of just like flowed that way. So I didn't really go in with questions. The questions formed, but I just remembered from the previous one that it felt like there was a lack of boundaries. And it was awkward in some instances because what was comfortable for him wasn't comfortable for me. And there was just no conversation. So me going into the last relationship of like, okay, this is a guy from church. I don't know how it's supposed to be different, but I don't know. I thought I was just gonna keep my hands in my pocket, and we were just gonna not even look at each other until going down the aisle. Like, as silly as it sounds, I'm like, I don't know. Are we supposed to kiss? Are we not supposed to kiss? So it was just the same. So I was like, okay, I know, we like each other, and there are some things that aren't a temptation. Like, I'm gonna hold your hand, I'm gonna give you a kiss, but what would be a temptation? And then we kind of just talked about it. And my temptations were a little bit different from his. So if it's not a temptation for me, but it's a temptation for him, we're both gonna do it, because it's still a temptation for one of us.
Yeah. You mean you're
Mm-hmm.
not going to do it?
We're not going to do it. Yes, that's what I mean.
I feel like if you don't talk about it, things are just going to happen, because that's just a natural progression of a relationship.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like people who don't talk about it end up in a situation that they don't want to be in or they regret. I think it's so important because they're okay, this is what we are okay doing, and it doesn't have to awkward, and also decide for yourself, if you are a Christian and you have certain beliefs, what are you personally deciding to do? And then that kind of, when you do have that conversation, it's easy to state, like, hey, I'm waiting until marriage. I'm not going to do these 3 things, or I'm not okay with these things, or I am okay with these things. And like that way, when you talk about them, it's already out there. If they're not cool with it, you can just move on very quickly and not have to any time. So I love that. I think the quicker you can bring up those big conversations, the better, because then you're not wasting anybody's time.
Yeah.
And especially thinking about marriage, that's like the biggest thing,
Yeah.
You're dating just to like get to know people and like see what you like and stuff like that. I think that's very different than like being serious about like really finding a life partner.
For sure. Yeah, I totally agree.
So tell me about your first year of marriage. Like, how was that?
First year we had a lot of people in our corner kind of just giving us lots of nuggets of wisdom. So I really appreciate it. Like, I'm the type of person that will listen to your mistakes. Like, please tell me so that I don't have to make them, and I will take. And I heard a lot of good advice from trusted people about like, the first year is hard. You're living together for the first time. So you deal with just house and living partner situations, also with space situations. Like, you hang out with this person, but when they're at home, like, are they more of like, I just want to watch TV and chill sometimes, or like they like always want to be with you, or so it's just like situations like that. Our first year was pretty smooth. Honestly, it was nice. We established things really quickly. I thank the Lord, because I feel like that eliminated so many arguments.
Yeah.
Because in the beginning, I'll give you an example of just house stuff. So how I like to show love is acts of service. I'll do it, but I also like to receive acts of service. So how he shows love is a little bit different. It's not acts of service. He likes to physical touch. That's how he will show it. That's also how he likes it. But I like them all. Like, the whole tank is split up into all of them. But the major one, I guess I could say, in year 1 was that. But I took a lot of pride, and I wouldn't say pride. I found joy in really just doing like the wife things, right? So like I enjoyed cooking, I enjoyed cleaning, I didn't mind it. But then it got a little overwhelming, and I just remember being like, okay, I'm kind of overdoing it all. And we established parts, and we really broke down things like, okay, laundry, dishes, this and that. What do you absolutely hate? And he's like, I hate vacuuming. I was like, all right, I don't hate vacuuming, I'll vacuum. And then he's like, okay, I don't mind the dishes. And I was like, sweet, you can do the dishes, I'll cook, I don't really mind cooking. And then I'll do and then we just broke it down so practically. And then he thrives on routine and list. So there's a date that everything happens. And it's nice that way. For us, it works because then there's like this expectation that it's going to happen. But then it also leaves so much room for grace if it doesn't happen, because the normal is that it's gonna happen. So on a day where I come home and I'm like, I just don't want to cook, I'm tired, the majority is that I'll cook. He'll cook like maybe once or twice. We cook a lot because we don't like to spend money out. So we'll cook a lot. He'll cook once a week when I want a break. But if none of us want to cook, there's just grace for that, because it's not the usual. And I don't know, it just works because we've established parts and we're pretty diligent in keeping those parts so that the house kind of functions well and it's well supported, so that when it doesn't happen, it's not like the end of the world. It's not like I'm never touching those dishes and he's never doing the laundry, because then that bubbles over to the intimacy of just communication with your partner. And it's as silly as you not having a well supported home that really seeps into the honeymoon phase of year 1. So I felt like because we broke those parts, it was nice. But if we didn't, I could so see how that makes year 1 so frustrating.
I feel like that's like the number one thing I hear from couples that are first year. And I feel like me and my husband, we didn't really experience that because we're both pretty similar. Like, we're both clean, but we're also kind of chill. So house is messy because we're living in it. Like, we're not gonna like freak out about it.
Yeah.
But I might start cleaning it up, or he might start cleaning it up, and like it ends up being like a good balance. But I feel like that's like the most common thing I hear from like early marrieds. I feel like the enemy would want us to get so hung up on those things, and like they're so unimportant. Because there's like so many bigger battles that are in marriage that you have to think about, and like think about your future and like how you're gonna parent and like all these other big things. And like you're fighting about dishes, like that's so small, in comparison to everything else. And the other I hear, you kind of mentioned it, but like habits. Like someone might be like a night owl and like stay up late at night. The other person might be like an early bird, or like one person really likes to go out and socialize, and the other person like is like very introverted and wants to be home all the time and read books and like, did you guys like have anything like that where what did that come up at all for you guys?
Not really. We both like to go out. No, we didn't really have that particular issue. No, not that I can think of. He works from home, so he started working from home after COVID, and that kind of changed things because we both like to go out and he loves to socialize. But there was like a period where he was just comfortable being home, so I kind of just pushed him a little, like maybe you should go out and like, it's good for you to get some sun because I mean being cooped up all day like that's gonna take a toll. And that was like a little hiccup because I didn't want to be nagging or like come outside, do it, you know what I mean? For me, I wanted him to just be, his best and have everything that he needs. So I'm thinking exercise is important. You need that. You need to socialize. But there was like this little line of like, if I keep pestering him, I'm gonna be the nagging wife. So I kind of just went out, and if I wanted him to walk, I went on a walk. And I asked him if he wanted to join me. And he said no a couple times. And then he said yes a couple times. The Lord showed me that because it wasn't just like that. He really did a work in me because I was the nagging wife a little bit. I kind of was just like, I want you to do this. Like, I want you to do it. And it's good for you. And you should listen to me. And it was, kind of like momming. And I didn't notice it was momming until he sat down and he was like, listen, I just don't like the way that you speak to me sometimes. And I was like, but everything that I say, it's never offensive or like, I don't say anything mean. And he's like, no, you don't. The words are there. It's the tone is kind of like demeaning. And I was like, I never realized that. And then I just took a minute. And in marriage, I've noticed that it's like a mirror. So a lot of the things that maybe you're looking at your partner that you're like, I wish he didn't do that, or I wish he didn't do that. You might be doing it. Maybe God wants to really make the change in you, and then it will reflect in your partner. Because I would get a little attitude, and one of the qualities that I love about my husband and why I married him is I'm a firecracker, and he is like a cool soundboard. Like I will firecracker, and he just like absorbs it, and it just like literally like bounces off, hits me, and I'm like, I sound ridiculous. Like I'm being dramatic. I should stop talking. I love that because he's just like so chill. But then I noticed after so much of that firecracker, right? I mean, silly arguments. It's just like if I'm telling a story, if I'm like complaining, the way that I'd say something, firecracker. And then he started absorbing a little bit of it. And then he would kind of like dish it back in bits. And I'm like, I don't like that. Like, I don't like this at all. And then I noticed that it was me. Like, oh, I'm really the problem. So I'll give you one example if you don't mind me going a little off. There was one example where I felt like I was doing the dishes forever. And I was like, he needs to do the dishes. And I wanted to be a firecracker and be like, you need to do the dishes. I've been doing the dishes forever. And I just remember he already told me he doesn't like the way that I speak to him. So in that moment, I'm doing the dishes and I'm praying to the Lord and I'm like, okay, God, I'm mad. And I need you to control my anger right now because I'm really about to pop off. And I need you to come get your son. Like, come get your son and tell him to do the dishes because I'm mad. And then I kind of he's my therapist and I'm going and I'm telling him everything and I start cooling down. And I was like, okay, but see, this is exactly what he's talking about. Like, look at the way that you're speaking about your husband in your head. Like, I love him. And then I just kind of switched and I just felt in my heart, like, change how you're thinking about him. And then things will change how you speak about him. So I was like, okay, I love him. He's had a hard day. I've had a hard day. Somebody's got to do dishes. I get to do these dishes. I love my husband. He's so good. And as I'm doing these dishes and I'm still angry. Like, I'm still frustrated. The reality is my emotions are still there. But I decided to switch something in my mind and it started to change a little bit. And he comes behind me and he puts his hands on my shoulder and he gives me a kiss and he's like, baby, move, I'll do the dishes. You've been doing the dishes a long time. And I was just like, yes, Lord, you did it. And if I just turned around and I was like, do the dishes, he wouldn't have done the dishes. Or maybe he would have, but like,
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
I love what you're I think that's so practical. Like, first is like get on the same page on just like practical house duties. Like that's so easy to do, so practical. Yeah. Write down a list of you can come up with a list looking on the internet and like just divvy it all up. And like the second thing of like what you're saying, like you had a thought that led to a feeling that could have potentially led to an action. Mm-hmm. But like you decided to change your thoughts through prayer, and then that led to different feelings, and then God allowed it to be like be a different resolve, and like maybe he wouldn't have come, like maybe he might have not come up to you and finished the dishes for you and you would have finished, but you probably would have ended feeling so much different than like
Yeah.
how you started, and also I think like it shifted your approach the next time that you did the dishes.
Yeah.
I love what you did too, because like it's like you went from that thought and then you switched it to gratitude. And like, I should be thankful. Like, I'm thankful for my husband. He loves me. He takes care of me. He provides for me. If he's had a long day, and I'm serving him in this way. Like just really shifting your frame of mind. And I feel like that's one of the first things as women we're tested in our marriage, is like how we think about our husband, and then how we talk about our husband, and then to ourselves, but then how we talk about him to other people. And that is exactly where the thread of respect can like easily be broken. It like starts with your thought, and then it could come out in your words very quickly. So I think what you said is so practical, especially for young married women or if you're, in your first couple years of marriage, even in your 7th year, because then it's like after your first few years, I feel like you can start to forget some things that are so practical that you need to keep doing,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like maintenance.
Yes. So what would you, if you were to go back to your younger self, what would you tell her?
I would tell her that, wow, I feel like there's like so much, but I guess I would tell her that there is identity, that you have one, and that there's a home for it. And there's only one of you, because I felt like for a while I was trying to pick up pieces of somebody else. Like if I liked something, I'm like, oh, that's cool. Like I wish I was like that. And I was listening to a testimony a while ago, and she was saying how God saved her and showed out. And then she just questioned God, like, why me? Why did you come for me? Why did you come to the depths and the shadows, the valley of shadows, to come and save me? Like, who am I? And he spoke to her, God spoke to her saying, there's only one of you.
Wow.
And that's true. Like, there's only one Illy. There's only one Melanie. He only makes one. Everything is so intricate. So he finds joy in his creation. Like, when you buy something handmade and in the bottom it says every blank is made uniquely, or when you buy something tied at, like every design is different. No one thing is the same. You can buy something that has like a similar color scheme, but it's not going to be exactly the same. So I just kind of, when she said that, it felt like God also used that and spoke to me and was like, there's only one you, and I find joy in all the things that I put in you. And I felt like I was trying to change those intricate little details to match maybe something else that I saw from another person that I admired. And it's not me, and it's not my identity, and there's only one Illy, and I should just embrace it, even if I don't like it, even if I wish I had different hair, or I wish I was taller, or whatever. He only made one of me, and whatever.
No, that's so good. That's so good. Yeah, well, thank you, Illy, for joining me in this conversation. I loved everything I got to talk to you about identity, and just like those first few years of marriage, I think like everything was so practical and so powerful, and it speaks to somebody else.
Yeah, thanks for having me. This is fun.